Welcome. Welcome to the City of Laguna Niguel's Veterans Day ceremony. And thank you for joining us on this day, Veterans Day, when we as a nation pause to honor America's veterans for their patriotism, love of country, and willingness to serve and sacrifice for the common good. To open our program, we will have the presentation of colors from Boy Scout Troop 772. The national anthem will be sung by Katie Schaefer, Cadet Girl Scout from Troop 2544, followed by a moment of silence led by Dennis Mulvaney, Vice Commander for American Legion Post 281 and a Military Support Committee member. Please stand and remain standing until the colors are posted, which will be after the moment of silence.
Audience attention. Color guard attention. Color guard advance. Color card, prepare to post the colors.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight for the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets we clear, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave for the lands of the free and the home of the brave.
Color guard, post the colors. Color guard, regroup. Color guard, dismissed. Audience at ease.
No. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing. 100 years ago, today, the armistice was signed, ending World War I. For whom the bell tolls. Please remain standing for a moment of silence to honor those who gave their lives to protect our freedom. Thank you. You may be seated.
Need my stool so you can see me. Okay. 100 years ago today, quiet came to a war zone halfway around the world. On the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, fighting ceased between the Allied nations and Germany in what was known at that time as the Great War, or the War to End All Wars. since it was unfortunately not the war to end all wars. It is known to subsequent generations as World War I. Approximately 22 million of our fellow citizens once carried the title of active duty Marine, soldier, airman, sailor, Coast Guardsman, National Guardsman, or Merchant Mariner, and now carry the title of veteran. We know them as our neighbors, our friends, our colleagues, and family members. They make us proud to be Americans. Many of our veterans served in the middle of the last century. You are the ones who fought in Europe and the Pacific to throw back tyrants, to answer aggression, and to liberate millions. Others of you defended our interests in the mountains of Korea or the jungles of Vietnam, or during the long vigil of the Cold War, or the caves in Afghanistan, or the sands of the Middle East. Whenever and wherever your service took place, you earned this nation's respect on the day you first put on the uniform, and you still have our respect today. Out of all 50 states, California is the home to the greatest number of veterans, the greatest number of active duty military, and the greatest number of military installations. We are surrounded with reminders of the men and women who stepped forward in every generation to serve the United States and the cause of freedom, and who as veterans continue to make contributions for the welfare of our nation. Right here in our neighboring city of Laguna Woods lives a veteran with an amazing story to share. It is truly a privilege to have her here with us today. Muriel Phillips Engelman, born in Connecticut, received her RN degree from Cambridge Hospital of Nursing in 1942 and was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Army Nurse Corps in April of 1943. She requested overseas duty and sailed with her hospital unit in December of 1943 to England. The rest of the story is hers to tell. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Muriel Engelman and her husband, Mel Engelman.
I was part of the Army Nurse Corps for 3 years during World War II. 2 of those years were spent overseas in England, France, and Belgium. One of the most hectic and harrowing periods of my Army service occurred in the weeks leading up to and during the Battle of the Bulge, which was the biggest, bloodiest, and most decisive battle of World War II. Our hospital was a general hospital that held 1,000 beds. It was staffed by 50 physicians, dentists, and medical administrative officers, 100 nurses, physiotherapists, and Red Cross workers, and 500 enlisted men responsible for the upkeep and maintenance of the hospital and to assist the nurses in the care of wounded soldiers. In those days, a general hospital was always located 100 miles or more behind fighting lines because of the scope of its size and equipment, usually in a permanent building with running water and electricity, unlike the much smaller hospitals like field and evacuation hospitals that were located close to the fighting lines. Back in those days, they did not yet have the helicopters they had in later wars that were a blessing for ferrying a severely wounded soldier to a general hospital more than 100 miles away for major surgery. So patients frequently died in the long ambulance trip to a general hospital. To rectify this situation, the War Department began an experiment, that of putting a general hospital in tents as close to the fighting lines as possible, using the triage system. And our hospital, the 16th General, was to be part of that experiment. They just failed to warn us that at some point we were going to be ahead of the fighting lines instead of 100 miles behind them, where we belonged. Our hospital unit arrived in Liverpool, England on January 8, 1944, and we spent the next several months setting up and operating a hospital in North Wales until June 6, D-Day, which was when the Americans crossed the English Channel to invade the Normandy coastline and liberate the French people. Our hospital unit followed suit about 6 weeks later to debark at Utah Beach. This was in a trip that would normally take 3 to 4 hours to make the 21-mile crossing across the English Channel. It took us 3 nights and 3.5 days because the channel was still blocked with all the debris of D-Day, of the fallen planes and half-sunken ships. We then camped out in a Normandy cow pasture for the next 7 weeks, waiting for the Germans to be cleared out of Liège, Belgium, so we could move on up to Belgium and establish our tent hospital in an apple orchard on the outskirts of Liège. Liège was a large, beautiful city of some 200,000 inhabitants with the Meuse River running through it. And here is Liège. It was known especially as a coal mining area, a renowned music and religious center, and especially as a supply depot because of its rail line that went to all the surrounding countries, Germany, Luxembourg, France, Holland. So this rail line was important strategically for carrying troops and supplies. And it was this rail line that Hitler wanted to destroy when he began sending his buzz bombs into Liège in November. These buzz bombs, also known as V1s and robot bombs, each carried 2,000 pounds of explosives. You couldn't see them coming at first. You could just hear them puttering along in the distance, and then as you looked, you'd see a moving black dot, which gradually began to look like a flying cross. And in the nighttime sky, you could see tongues of flame issuing from the ends of this flying cross. As the bomb got closer in the sky and the noise of its motor grew louder, you'd start to hold your breath as you mentally urged the motor of that bomb to keep running, because once the motor stopped, if the motor stopped before it was overhead, it would plunge to earth at a 45-degree angle with a horrible whining whistle and destroy everything in its path on the ground for hundreds of feet. Its concussion could be felt miles away. If the motor of the bomb was still running as it passed overhead, then it was safe to resume breathing. But then they came out with another bomb that really fooled us, because the bomb had passed overhead and we had resumed breathing. But then the bomb made an abrupt U-turn and headed in our direction. And then they sent bombs that came from 3 different directions, all at the same time. The bombs came over every 12 to 15 minutes, 24 hours a day, and they came for the next 2.5 months. Our hospital was hit 3 times by buzz bombs, causing the destruction of hospital tents and casualties inflicted upon patients and hospital personnel. We worked, slept, ate, went to the latrine to the sound of buzz bombs either flying over or about to drop. And you never wanted to be caught in the latrine tent with 4 layers of pants around your ankles when one was dropping. You had your combat pants, pant liners, long underwear, and panties. Before even venturing into this tent, you always paused at the doorway first and scanned the sky for any incoming objects. Then you ran in, did what you had to do, and ran out, still pulling up your outer layer of pants. Our patients hated being confined to a hospital bed in Buzzbomb Alley, which is what they called the Liège area. And to a man, they all said they'd rather be back at the fighting lines where it was comparatively quiet, at least some of the time. But despite the continual buzz bombings, our hospital was going full blast as we admitted and evacuated hundreds of patients a day under the triage system, and our beds never cooled off. Under the triage system, priority for treatment depended upon the severity of the patient's injuries. If the injuries were extremely severe, requiring long hours of surgery and many, many months of recuperation, the patient received just enough care and attention to make him as pain-free as possible. And within a few hours, he was evacuated to a general hospital in England, France, or the States. Coping with the buzz bombs was bad enough, but then we had the weather to worry about because the month of November, Belgium was inundated by heavy torrential rains, and our tent hospital was a sea of mud. Every tent leaked. On November 16th, the Americans began a huge offensive against the Germans, and our tent hospital had to be open to receive casualties, finished or not. And believe me, we were far from finished because many of the cement tent floors had not yet been poured. So we nurses sloshed ankle deep in water and mud on our 12-hour duty shifts, and our feet were always waterlogged. With our leaking tents, the entire hospital area, was just a sea of mud, and we just couldn't keep our feet dry at all, and you couldn't try to do anything about it during the day once you were working. We are constantly shifting beds around, trying to keep our patients as dry as possible. The first few weeks, the only water we had, the only running water, we didn't have any except for the water that ran freely through those leaky tents. We did have heat in the form of coal-burning, pot-bellied stoves, and the Belgian coal that we burned threw a much warmer heat than the British coke we had burned the previous winter in England. We had no electricity, though, and the long, dark hospital tents were just barely illuminated by kerosene lanterns and flashlights. When we went from bed to bed giving morphine shots, a corps man had to stand at our elbow with a flashlight focused on the site of injection. And the casualties just piled in with their strained, anxious faces. Eventually, the rains did stop. And I do want to mention that these, our patients came in, their foreheads were marked in purple gentian violet with a P or an S, indicating that they had already received a penicillin or a sulfa drug or shot before reaching us. Then the rains finally stopped, and all construction on our hospital was completed. Then on December 16th, German General von Rundstedt made his famous counterattack into Belgium, starting the Battle of the Bulge. And on this map, I'll try to show you how the Battle of the Bulge got its name. All territory to the right of this line is Germany. Up here is Holland, Luxembourg, France, and here is Liège. Here is Liège. Down here is Bastogne. The Americans had become a little complacent the past several months because of their rapid advance through all of France and then Luxembourg, then Belgium. They were so sure the war was going to be over in 2 weeks by Christmas, and they failed to note that the Germans were massing troops and tanks along the German-Belgian border, up here north at Monschau, and 45 miles here at Echternach on the Belgian-Luxembourg border. And when the Germans found these two thinly guarded areas, they plunged through simultaneously into Belgium, and they formed this bulge. Now down here in the southern portion of the bulge was the small mill crossroads town of Bastogne. Looking at it on the map, it resembled the spokes of a wheel because of the many roads crisscrossing throughout. And most of these roads were dirt roads that could become quagmires of mud during rainy season. But 7 of these roads were paved, and it was because of these paved roads that Hitler had to get control of Bastogne, because these paved roads would allow him easier access for his heavy mechanized vehicles to reach the major highways of Belgium, so he could reach his desired destination, the port of Antwerp. It was here in Bastogne where 21,000 Americans, 11,000 alone just from the 101st Airborne Division, were completely surrounded by Germans and given an ultimatum to surrender within 2 hours. Acting Commander General Anthony McAuliffe gained instantaneous lifetime fame with his one-word reply to the German ultimatum to surrender in 2 hours, and that one word was nuts. The German officer who had delivered the ultimatum, and he spoke English perfectly, he was perplexed, and he asked General McAuliffe's aide, "What is the meaning of this word nuts?" The aide replied, "It means go to hell." Up here, 64 short miles from Bastogne, 54, was our tent hospital. And the German plan was to head on up to Liège, where they would cross the Meuse River and then head toward Brussels. But they would bypass Brussels, and then it was just a straight run on to Antwerp, where they could easily capture the seaport there and cut off all Allied shipping. This was all supplies, not just for the Americans, but for the British and the Canadians also. Down here, some 25 miles southeast of Liège, was a small farming community of Malmedy, site of the infamous Malmedy massacre. It was here where 140 to 150 Americans were herded by the Germans into a nearby field, and though their arms were raised in the upright position of surrender, they were ruthlessly mowed down or clubbed to death or shot point blank into the head. Many of them had their fingers and hands cut off, not just so the Germans could get their rings and watches, but more importantly, their warm winter gloves, which the German army did not have. And this was the most bitterly cold winter with the most snow and ice the Belgians had seen in 100 years. Some historians say it was the coldest winter in all of Belgium's history, with temperatures going down to below 30 degrees below zero and lasting for days at a time. Not all the Americans were killed under the German onslaught, and under cover of darkness, about 40 of them who were still alive were able to make it on their own or were helped by the Belgians to nearby American hospitals. The Americans were completely demoralized by the German breakthrough, and the entire U.S. Army was in a turmoil. Our anti-aircraft fired on our planes fired on our infantry. You've heard of friendly fire. Well, this is a good example. Thousands of German paratroopers dressed in American uniforms were dropped to infiltrate American lines. Other paratroopers draped in white sheets were dropped on snow-covered areas. Thousands of Americans were slaughtered, thousands were captured, and thousands more were pushed back. Suddenly, the week before Christmas, a sudden heavy, dense fog fell over all of Belgium, creating an eerie, gray, silent landscape. And the only sounds we could hear were the muffled sounds of buzz bombs dropping. This fog was so thick you couldn't see 5 feet in front of you, yet the German tanks and infantry were able to move forward on the ground, and our planes couldn't get off the ground to bomb them, and the Germans headed steadily towards Liège. At this point in time, our hospital was functioning as an evacuation hospital, as we were the closest hospital to the fighting lines, and the casualties just piled in. They came with their uniforms muddied, bloodied, torn, their faces gray with fatigue. So many of them had the blackened, blistered feet of trench foot, which more times than not ended in amputation. We had to have a special tent for our trench foot cases because once gangrene set in, the stench from the decaying flesh was so awful, it sickened our other patients. And our patients' injuries were beyond horrible. It was difficult for the nurses to try not to not display any signs of emotion as we treated these broken, mutilated bodies. We just would engage, would try to, would affect an air of nonchalance as we engaged them in conversation. "Hi, soldier, what part of the States are you from?" And this was a question that they all loved because they loved to talk about their hometown. "Well, don't you worry, we'll have you fixed up as good as new by the time you get back there." We told a lot of white lies, but we had to give them hope. We listened to the daily news reports of German advances with sinking hearts as the Germans got closer and closer to Liège. 2 days before Christmas, as my roommate and I got off night duty, we decided we were going to open our Christmas packages from home that morning because surely in 2 days, by Christmas Day, we'd be dead. If we weren't killed by buzz bombs, then we'd be captured and probably killed by the Germans. And if anyone was going to enjoy those packages from home, it was going to be us and not some old German. So here we were, sitting on our cot beds in our little 5th floor chateau bedroom, opening those lovingly wrapped gifts from home and eating the homemade goodies that we washed down with our ration of French champagne. We each consumed a whole magnum of champagne that morning. And I must say we had the best sleep that day that we had had in months. If the entire German army had marched through that little chateau bedroom, we would have been oblivious. By the next day, December 24th, the Germans were 10 miles from Liège, and some German paratroopers had already been dropped into the city. Many of the American hospitals in the area had already been evacuated back to England or France, and we hoped to be evacuated also. We waited for orders to be evacuated, which never came. Instead, we nurses were ordered to pack our musette bags with the warmest clothing we had and any first aid supplies in the event we were captured by the Germans, and to be ready to move out with 10 minutes' notice. typically female. The first item that went into those musette bags were the French perfume we had all purchased in Paris several months earlier. And this was followed by our cigarette ration, because a pack of American cigarettes could go a long way for bartering in war-torn Europe. And we were scared. I a little more so than the others, because I had an H for Hebrew on my dog tags, the very ones Hitler wanted to annihilate. Our patients were furious that American women were so far up front, and when orders came to evacuate our sickest bed patients, as we loaded them into trucks and ambulances, they begged us to change places with them. One of my patients, who was so concerned about my possible capture by the Germans, that he constructed a blackjack for me to carry with me at all times. And believe me, I did, and I will show you this blackjack. I don't know if you can see it, but I'm holding it in my right hand. It was a 10-inch length of hosing stuffed with lead sinkers, and it was suspended from my wrist by a leather thong. And his directions were, if a crowd comes near you, take this blackjack and slam it across his face and aim for the eyes. Another patient gave me a spring blade knife, which you can see outlined in my left pocket. And his directions were, if a crowd approaches, plunge the knife blade into his belly, turn it, and then run like hell. That day, as we were evacuating our sickest bed patients to the rear, the fog that had hung over all of Belgium for the past week began lifting, and by nighttime it had completely dissipated, and a full moon arose. This moon was so full and so bright, it lit up our hospital area with an almost daytime light, and the painted red crosses on our tents were clearly outlined in this light. I was on night duty in my surgical shock tent when sometime a little before 8 o'clock, I heard the sound of a plane overhead. This was a sound we hadn't heard in over a week because the fog that had grounded all planes. And I knew from the sound of the motor it wasn't one of our planes. We had learned early on to distinguish the difference between the sound of our planes from the German planes. I stepped outside the tent to take a look, and I was greeted by the most beautiful sight of what seemed to be hundreds of red flares dropping through the nighttime sky. And I stood there momentarily mesmerized by this 4th of July-like display. As I stood there watching, the plane that had dropped these flares began flying lower, back and forth across our hospital tents and nearby enlisted men's tents, dropping anti-personnel bombs and strafing the tents. I ran back into my tent where my patients were already putting on their steel helmets, and I told them to get under their beds. Fortunately, all my patients were ambulatory, as the sickest bed patients had been evacuated earlier that day. I found an empty bed and scrambled under it too, letting out a shriek as I did so. My corps man, who was at the other end of the tent, called out anxiously, "Lieutenant, were you hit?" "No," I called back in a very disgusted voice, "only by a loaded duck." In hospital lingo, a loaded duck is a full urinal. My patients laughed uproariously at this, and it helped dispel some of the fear and patience, the fear that we had all felt a few minutes before. As this plane kept flying back and forth across the hospital tents and nearby enlisted men's tents, still dropping his explosives and strafing, the anti-aircraft battery behind our hospital opened up and began firing at the plane, but they kept missing it, and instead we had flak coming through our tents that we certainly didn't need. And eventually, after disposing of all of his explosives, the plane flew off into the night. Many patients and hospital personnel were wounded or killed that night. Our entire day crew came back on duty to help out in the operating rooms and surgical tents or wherever needed. It was a night of horror no one will ever forget. Before going off duty that morning, I stepped over to a nearby tent that held soldiers too seriously wounded to be moved. I had been visiting this tent each morning and night when coming on and off night duty, as there was a young soldier there from my hometown. Though we hadn't known each other before, just the fact that he was from my hometown, Meriden, Connecticut, so many thousands of miles away, and he had gone to my high school. It was just so wonderful. It brought home so close, and so we would talk about. When I visited him each time, we spent many precious minutes talking about the teachers in the high school who we liked, those we didn't like. We talked about the physical characteristics of the town, the West Peak Mountain, the Hubbard Park, and the beautiful lake, and the gorgeous daffodil display in the spring. And it was just so wonderful being able to talk about home. And then when we discovered that his mother was a customer in my mother's dress shop, well, that practically made us kissing cousins. And it just brought home so close that we were able to forget about the war in those few precious moments. We didn't discuss the fact that he was missing an arm, a leg, and an eye. We just enjoyed those few minutes of home. As I entered his tent that morning, I saw with shock, anger, and sorrow that his bed and several beds in line with his were empty. Going off night duty with a couple of other nurses, we straggled down the path to the nurses' quarters, too empty and spent to even talk, as each of us silently reviewed the night of horror in our own minds. A nurse coming on day duty greeted us in the path with a muted "Merry Christmas." Merry Christmas. It sounded absolutely ludicrous because we didn't even know what day it was. And it seemed to hit our funny bones all at the same time. We stood there in the path, bent over with hysterical laughter for several minutes, and it helped dispel some of our feelings, which was a little help at that point. Christmas Day had dawned bright and clear. The sun was out for the first time in over a week. Of course, the buzz bombs were out on their 12 to 15-minute visits, as they had been during the fog-bound week. But our planes were out for the first time in over a week, and so were the German planes, and we watched as they engaged our planes in dogfights, and we saw flaming planes spiraling to the ground as we silently prayed that they were German planes and not ours. Christmas week was a nightmare, with German planes coming over every night to drop their paratroopers dressed in American uniforms to infiltrate every American base. These paratroopers had been well-versed in American slang, but one subject that they hadn't been taught was that of American sports. And when they were challenged by guards as they attempted to infiltrate a base, they couldn't answer such questions as who won the World Series or who's a pitcher for the Dodgers or the Yankees. Another question that could usually get them was, what shoe size do you take? And if they said size 44, we knew we had them. That same week of Christmas, the prisoner of war compound that was attached to our hospital was searched, and the POWs were found to have a huge supply of knives and guns they had been planning to use in a breakout against us. In the months that the POWs had been working for us, they had been very subservient and anxious to please as they went about performing their menial but necessary jobs that freed up our enlisted men for the more important job of caring for our wounded soldiers. The POWs shoveled snow, they carried litters, they replenished coal buckets, they cleaned latrines. They were happy to be out of the fighting, happy to have a warm bed to sleep in at night and 3 square meals a day. But once the German breakthrough began, they became very arrogant and surly. And it was this very arrogance of theirs that prompted the search of their tent. As Christmas week drew to a close, more of our planes were seen in the sky, and soon they outnumbered the German planes. The next 2 weeks, we saw huge, constant waves of our planes by day, thousands and thousands of them, and thousands of the Royal Air Force, the RAF at night. And it was the most, as they flew over Germany, and it was the most heartwarming sight and sound for us to see and to hear as they flew on their missions to destroy the advancing German army. Thousands of Germans were surrendering, thousands more were captured, and we felt that the tides of war were turning in our favor. As our ground troops advanced into Germany, they mopped up pockets of resistance and destroyed German buzz bomb nests. By January 25th, the Battle of the Bulge was officially over, though there are many battles yet to be fought before the Germans surrendered on May 8th. We were kept busy without the threat of being killed by buzz bombs or captured by the Germans. Our lives were peaceful and content as we did the job we came overseas to do. In this 6-week period, 19,000 Americans had been killed, 47,000 wounded, and 21,000 missing in action or taken as prisoners of war. And when we first started out, we never expected that the Purple Hearts would be given to our hospital staff. There were 47 Purple Hearts given to members of our hospital staff, and 3 Purple Hearts with oak leaf clusters to indicate they had been wounded on more than one occasion by the enemy. In conclusion, I'd like to say there was no patient on earth as wonderful as G.I. Joe, the American soldier, for he never complained. He could lie in bed, racked with pain, and never ask for medication if he saw that we were busy elsewhere in the tent. And then when we did get to his bedside, he'd always say, "Take care of my buddy in the next bed first." And G.I. Joe was grateful. He thanked us over and over again for the slightest thing we did for his comfort, and would frequently grab our hands and kiss them. And G.I. Joe was grateful to be in an American hospital with a mattress and sheets and a bed, items he hadn't experienced sometimes for 1 or 2 years. And G.I. Joe was grateful for us being there, American women he hadn't seen or spoken to sometime for as much as 2 or 3 years. And G.I. Joe was generous to his enemy when the POWs entered the tent to perform some function like replenishing the coal buckets, he would motion for them to come to his bedside, holding out his pack of American cigarettes, and indicate that they should help themselves. And as they did so, he would pull out from under his pillow his packet of precious family photograph and hold them out for the POW to admire as he intoned, "My mother, my wife, my daughter." And then after the pictures were admired and returned to G.I. Joe, the POW performed the same act. He pulled from his pocket his own precious family photographs and held them out for G.I. Joe to admire. Here they were, two human beings, hungry for family and home. Caring for G.I. Joe, the American soldier, was truly a privilege, and it was one of the greatest experiences of my lifetime. Thank you.
Wow. What an incredible story. Thank you so much for sharing your life story today. I think all of us are enriched, enlightened, and really blessed by your presentation today. Thank you so much, Muriel. Now, as in recognition of her service to our country, Muriel is the recipient of 3 battle stars, a World War II Victory Medal, American Campaign Medal, Army of Occupation Medal, the Ferrogerie of the Belgian government, a Meritorious Service Plaque, and then this past July, she was appointed as a Chevalier of the National Order of the Legion of Honor by French President Emmanuel Macron. This award is the equivalent of a knighthood and is considered France's highest honor. And more recently this month, Congresswoman Mimi Walters has entered Muriel's service into the congressional record in recognition of her service during World War II. And she will be receiving a presentation of a plaque recognizing that on November 16th. So congratulations, Muriel. And thank you for your service. Now, I know it pales in comparison to recognition from Congresswoman Mimi Walters or from the French president. But on behalf of what you're doing today, what you're doing in the community, and keeping the history alive and sharing it with all of us and with our next generations, when I come down there, I will present you and Mel, both of you, with the Laguna Niguel Mayor's Challenge coin for your commitment to the community. So what you're doing now is very important to our future generations. So thank you very much. America's military veterans served our country in many different circumstances, from intense battlegrounds to the high seas, to faraway landing fields, to bases closer to home. Yet all of them throughout their service shared the same fundamental commitments. They took an oath to serve a cause greater than self-interest. They lived by a code and dedicated themselves to the highest standards of discipline, loyalty, diligence, and faithfulness to duty. And they stood ready for whatever duty called. It is only because of such men and women have always been willing to serve that our nation has been able to win freedom for others, to hold off the ambitions of the violent, and to keep the peace in troubled places. And above all, thanks to our veterans, the people of this great nation have lived in freedom for 242 years. We owe them our liberty. Almost 2.5 centuries have passed since George Washington first took command of the Continental Army, yet we can see in today's military the same virtues that won this nation our independence and have safeguarded our country despite all of its challenges throughout history. The active duty men and women who wear our country's uniform follow a long, honorable, and unbroken tradition of service that has been passed down to them by our veterans. To every veteran, our community and our nation owe a debt we cannot possibly repay, but we will always acknowledge. We honor your service by keeping your history alive so the future generations know the sacrifices that have been made so we can live in freedom. By supporting active duty military and families through the Laguna Niguel Military Support Committee, and by providing opportunities for the development of patriotic pride and leadership skills in our youth so they can continue to hold high the values for which you fought to preserve and protect our democracy. We give thanks and honor to the veterans who are here today. We will have Silver Award Girl Scout Katie Schaefer, who will be assisted by a Boy Scout commissioner for over 50 years, Dennis Mulvaney. They will come up here to read the veteran cards. If you could please join me up here. When they say your name, please stand and stay standing until the Junior Girl Scout from Troop 3159 or the Brownie from Troop 4497 delivers a handmade card to you. But this is the thanks and the appreciation from your community for your service. If there are any veterans who did not fill out the data card when you came in, please raise your hand and our volunteers will get one to you because we want to be sure to recognize every veteran who is here with us today. Okay. And can we have the cards up here, please? Janet, do you have the stack of cards? Okay, but yes.
Okay, so I would like to honor the first veteran, Muriel Phillips Engelman.
Then read off the rest.
Rank first
First lieutenant.
first
Lieutenant.
lieutenant, Branch Army Nurse Corps. Date of service 1943 to 1946.
Okay, next.
Our next veteran, Mel Engelman.
Continue.
Major Marine Corps. Maryland Marine Corps. Date of service 1943 plus 39 years.
Just put that on the bottom.
Okay. Next veteran, Peter
Thomas.
Peter Thomas.
Sergeant.
Sergeant,
U.S. Air Force.
U.S. Air Force. Date of service 1952. Okay, next one. Our next veteran is Wesley A. Estep. Lance Corporal, Branch Marines. Date of service June 11, 2017.
Okay, next.
Next veteran is George K. Purrington. Rank CPT, Branch Army. Date of service 60 to 74. Next veteran is Thomas Gales. Rank AT2, Branch Navy for
57.
57 years. Date of service 257. Next veteran, Brian C. Rees. Rank Air. What does that say?
Oh,
does that say?
Airman?
Rank Airman, Branch Navy, Branch Navy, date of service 1966 to 1970. Next veteran, John Ulrich, rank
Staff Sergeant.
Staff Sergeant, Branch U.S. Air Force, date of service 1966 to 1970. Chuck Strong, rank LTC RAT, Branch U.S. Army / USMC, date of service 1974 to 2009. Skip Stevenson, rank Captain, Branch Marines, date of service 1966 to 1970. Dwight Mudry, rank. Wait, sorry. What's that rank?
E5.
Rank E5, Branch Army Natural. What does that say? What does that say? Natural.
National Guard.
National Guard. Date of service
164.
164 to 170. Bill Lieber, rank
Sergeant.
Rank Sergeant, Branch Army, date of service 73 to 76. Maynard Rains, rank Major, Branch U.S. Army, date of service 1973 to 1997. Robert McCormick, rank Major, Branch Marine Corps, date of service 1971 to 1992. Charlotte McCormick, rank
Looks like Commander.
Commander, Branch Navy, date of service 1998 to 1998.
98.
98, yeah. Jim Van Schack, rank Sergeant, Branch Army, date of service 1946 to 1948.
Goofed on the rank.
Sean Pem, First Sergeant, Branch U.S. Army, date of service 1992 to 2018. Michael I said this before. Garnwriter, rank Private, Branch U.S. Marine Corps, date of service 1973. Paul Odo, rank CDR, USN, Branch Navy, date of service 1961 to 1981. Janet Odo, rank YN3, Branch U.S. Navy. Date of service 1961 to 1964. Dennis Mulvaney, rank Senior Airman,
First class.
First Class 8th Air Force, date of service 1954. Dave Tuma, rank Airman First Class, Branch Air Force, date of service 1982 to 1986. William Harris, rank Sergeant E5, USMC,
Vietnam.
Vietnam, date of service 1965 to 1969.
Frank.
Frank McGrath, rank LT, branch U.S. Navy, submarine services, date of service, date of service 1970 to 1976. Okay, I am terrible at pronouncing things, so just be aware.
We're working on it.
Yeah.
I'm here. George.
George, you.
Huh?
What did I say?
Oshkosh.
George Oshkosh, rank
Airman second class.
Airman second class, branch Air Force, date of service, I said it, 1965 to 1963. William Brooks, rank LT, branch U.S. Navy, date of service World War II. Jeff.
Wow. Jeff. Oaklis.
Jeff Oaklis, rank CW4, branch Army, date of service 1968 to 1991.
Jeff.
John Pointer, I can't read that.
That's Command Sergeant Major.
Command Sergeant Major, branch U.S. Army, date of service 1970 to 2000. Bruce Birkeland,
Birkeland. U.S. Air Force.
U.S. Air Force, date of service 1969 to 1972. Steve Morris, rank E2, branch Army, date of service 1952 to 1956.
L.
Mel Engelman, rank
Major.
Major Marine Corps, branch Maryland Marine Corps, date of service 1943 plus 39 years.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Katie and Dennis, and thank you to all of our veterans. In Laguna Niguel, we have a number of different organizations that serve to support our veterans and also our active duty military. We recently, or I think maybe it was 5 years ago, established an American Legion post, and it had been quite a while since another post had been established in this country. So could all of the American Legion post members please rise? So thank you again for your service, but also, no, stay standing. Thank you. I didn't say sit down yet. But thank you for what you continue to do in our community, because in addition to supporting our veterans and our active duty military, they also raise awareness and American pride and inculcate a sense of patriotism and teach our children about the things that make our country great and how they can be the future leaders by sponsoring Boys State and Girls State and many things with our youth. So if I could also have the members of the American Legion Auxiliary stand up. I know there's some of you here. And do we have any Sons of the American Legion or American Legion Riders? you could please stand. So if you are interested in finding out about the American Legion and what they do in our community, please see any of the people who you have seen standing, because they would be happy to talk to you about that. Another way that we support our veterans and our active duty military in Laguna Niguel is through our Laguna Niguel Military Support Committee. Both myself and Councilmember Davies are the co-chairs of that, and we have the honor of working with 15 committed, absolute outstanding residents in our city who do. It is a working committee. It's not an advisory committee. They are rolling their sleeves up and doing the work. So if I could have all the members of the Military Support Committee either rise or step forward if you're back there working, so we can acknowledge what you do. And if you would like to find out more about the Military Support Committee, please see any of the people in the red shirts. They will be happy to talk to you about that. And I know this weekend they are also having a toy drive over at Walmart to collect toys for our military children. But there are many things going on in our community to support both the veterans and our active duty. So thank you for what you do. I know Muriel, you've seen the slides, the pictures from her book. I got that several months ago. It's a fascinating book, which you will want to be sure to get. And she will be signing more copies after the program. And then we also do have refreshments in the back so that you can stay. So you can stay and talk and enjoy some fellowship. And feel free to speak to our speaker or to any of the American Legion or Military Support Committee members. But I thank all of you for coming out today and pausing to give honor to the great veterans of our nation. And they are what have made our nation and our community so remarkable. So thank you.